What's the dumbest or most inaccurate thing you've ever heard a teacher say? IDK if this counts, but I had a really dumb teacher who would always teach from a book. So one day he was telling us about how the toilets in Australia flush the other way. So he then talked for 10 minutes about how it was because of Australia being in the southern hemisphere, because that's what the book said. Then the book did a huge 180 and said how it was all just a myth and it was not true. So the teacher just stood there defeated and then moved on. So he pretty much was dumb enough to go on and on about one part of the book said, and then instantly get corrected by the book itself. I think teachers are supposed to read the book in advance. When I was 6 years old, we got a fun little make and answer your own maths question exercise. I wanted to show the teacher that my dad had shown me how to do additions and subtractions below 0. 1 3 equals minus 2 was marked as incorrect, because apparently you can't do maths below 0. But Mrs. H, what about temperatures on the weather forecast? That's different. That's not maths. Quick maths. My siblings had a history teacher who literally skipped the unit on Asia with the explanation nothing important ever happened in Asia. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. I took a typing class over the summer in middle school, and the teacher penalized me for using my left thumb for the space bar. When I objected that I'm left-handed, she replied, "But the book says it has to be your right thumb." I actually learned a lot from that interaction, though nothing about typing. Honestly, I'm sure most of us that came of age in the era before children had PCs to play with from the time of birth took a touch typing class, but almost no one does it by the book. I use about 3 fingers on each hand and I'm still fast and pretty accurate in general. Had a professor who didn't know ire, noun, intense anger, wrath, is a word. I used it in a paper. He violently circled it in red pen, put a question mark next to it and wrote not a word in the margin. How was this man a college professor? I hope you handed it back with a clipping from a dictionary. My high school American history teacher went on a 40-minute, hate-fueled rant about how useless and stupid buffalo are. They make dang good wings though. My grade 10 science teacher told us that the uterus is part of the excretory system during the biology unit. Someone asked the teacher if he didn't get something mixed up, but he just doubled down on it. Maybe for his mother it is. 2nd grade. We were writing words that started with B. I wrote bazooka. Teacher comes over, gives me a red mark over it and tells me there is nothing called that. FUB. I was right. Gum and gun. Don't teach. I can still remember my 8th grade teacher saying, to a room of lower and lower class students and some downright poor as heck, that you couldn't survive off of less than 40k a year. 15 years ago, knowing full well that my parents didn't make that much and I still had 3 meals a day, Nikes once a year, and a roof over my head, it still bothers me for some reason. Someone in that room needs to check their expenses, and it wasn't any of the students. 4th grade, social studies test. Bonus question, name one Supreme Court justice. Mind you, this was early 2009. I had no freaking clue. So I put down Sonia Sotomayor, since we'd all read about her in class. Obviously wrong. Since then, she was a nominee, not an actual judge, so my answer got marked wrong. Some kids put down Judge Judy. They got credit. When I asked why mine was wrong, she said it was because she wasn't a judge yet, but apparently Judge Judy was. But if judge was the only qualifier, then Sotomayor still counts. She was on the US Court of Appeals for years before joining the SCOTUS. There was a teacher at my high school who was positive that George W. Bush's middle name is Washington. It's actually Walker. She got in an argument with a student and pulled up his Wikipedia page, then asserted that somebody edited the page with the wrong info and that she was still right. Tenure is the only reason she's still employed. Pay teacher was explaining the difference between white meat and dark meat. She pointed at the only black kid in my class and said, if you took a bite out of Sebastian and then me, we'd taste different because he is dark meat and I am white meat. 5th grade me cringed. Holy crap, that's not even freaking subtle. Jesus. If it doesn't start with who, what, when, where or why, then it's not really a question. I got detention for asking her, are you sure? My first year teacher told the entire class that every time you breathe, A part of your heart turns black. When your heart is fully black, you die. Needless to say, we all did our best to stop breathing, and is something I still to do till this very day. Holding my breath, subconsciously, for inappropriate lengths of time for no reason. I wonder if there is any correlation. Either way, Mr. Cohen, what the heck, man? Biology, as taught by Zelda games. First aid course. Teacher said that the part of drinking that causes alcohol poisoning was the ethanol, but the alcohol in the drink was harmless. Hehehe, and the ethyl alcohol is also harmless. Had a substitute teacher tell us that America should just nuke every country in the Middle East because they're filled with more terrorists than people. I politely tell her that by doing that, it would make the US look like terrorists. She said no, it doesn't work that way, and sent me to my AP. Not a teacher, but in the 10th grade a history textbook said that the United States dropped an atom bomb on Tokyo and Hiroshima during World War II. My grade 5 teacher popped a quiz on the class once and asked us what the largest thing in the universe was. I said nobody knows, and this other kid said no, it's the sun. Guess who got marked as correct? And guess whose blood pressure still goes up typing this over 30 years later? Prep your quiz answers, Missy. You brain dead twit. Einstein said we only use 10% of our brains. When I called bulls and pointed out that even if he did, Einstein was a physicist, not a neurologist, I was told not that Einstein, a different one. There's a term for using 100% of your brain. It's called having a seizure. I once had a teacher tell me that clouds don't move. The earth moves around clouds. When I tried to correct her, I got in school suspension. We had Chinese exchange students over at my high school, and one of the teachers was trying to teach SAT English. She goes on to say that a plural subject requires singular verb. Her exact explanation was, since boys has an S at the end, the verb also has to have an S at the end. The correct answer is runs. The boys runs. The boys runs. The teachers runs. A little bit different, but when I was learning, my driving instructor told me that I did nothing wrong when I cut somebody off in the outside lane of a 2-lane traffic circle. He ended up getting fired 2 weeks later. In Canada we call roundabouts traffic circles, at least where I live. I'd like to think he knew his days were numbered, and his diabolical plot was to release a group of horrible drivers to terrorize people. This would explain Illinois. I had a business professor tell me that 1 out of 1,000 people get killed by planes falling out of the sky and hitting them. I raised my hand and told him that's a ridiculous statistic on its face and no way that it was true. In a nicer way, I gave the simple example that if that were true, 10 people a year in our small college town would die from planes crashing on their heads. He told me that's not how percentages work and it was a global percentage. I replied that yes, I understand, but then there must be many other zones where it's a leading cause of death and everyone dies from that to make up for the fact I've personally never heard of it happening anywhere close to us, or really anywhere, though I'm sure occasionally it occurs. Then he lectured me on how he thought percentages worked. Holy frick, he was dumb. I'm getting mad thinking about it 10 years later. And he had a PhD. I don't know if he realized he was wrong and refused to admit, or was suffering from some kind of old age retardation. It was the old age retardation. I have come across my share of people who are fogged in and will argue until the end of days. Honestly, there needs to be some sort of basic quiz they need to take every now and then to make sure that crappy knowledge isn't being spread. You can tell Uncle Tom's Cabin was written by a woman because Tom is very passive and helpful. If a man had written the novel, he'd have run away and you would have gotten action scenes. That's pretty funny, actually. I'm in Boy Scouts, almost an Eagle, and when I took the Orienteering Merit Badge, my counselor said compasses point north because there is a lot of iron ore in Canada. Complete moron. What an idiot. Everyone knows they point north because of all the anti-iron in South America. Had a teacher who called me Jeff for a year. Jeff isn't anything close to my name, and there was no one in that class named Jeff she was mistaking me for, and yet she insisted my name was Jeff. That sounds like something Jeff would say. My junior high science teacher tried to convince everybody that the lunar landings were fake and the government hid aliens in Area 51. But the absolute dumbest thing she ever said wasn't something I heard, but something my parents told me she said. See, this woman was a little kooky when I had her, but when my brother had her class she'd gone completely off the freaking rails, like, to the point where she was insisting trees can walk and people are reincarnated on other planets when they die. She started picking on popular students and openly bragging about her gambling habits. She'd also recently gotten married. This teacher was not an attractive woman, obviously insane, and generally unpleasant. So of course the 13-year-old kids she was teaching started gossiping about who the heck would marry this woman. They started joking about how the guy had to be blind and a complete moron because she was so awful. So like, he was probably a blind shepherd, because only an idiot would work as a shepherd in America while visually impaired. My hometown is small. Gossip spreads like wildfire through the grade school. So naturally within a week everybody'd heard that the science teacher had married a blind shepherd. And she somehow thought it was a good idea to bring it up during parent-teacher conferences. Yes, Sean is doing well in class. And oh, before you leave, I haven't married a blind shepherd. I don't know why people think I have, it doesn't make sense. But I want you to know I haven't married a blind shepherd. So anybody who hadn't heard the rumor knew about it, and anybody who didn't get why she was supposedly married to a blind shepherd was immediately informed. My dad nearly bust a gut holding in laughter and then had to explain to my naive mother why being married to a blind shepherd was so funny. She also brought her husband in, openly stating she did it to prove he wasn't a blind shepherd. Because that's what you do when you're an adult authority figure and 13-year-old shitheads are spreading a harmless rumor about your spouse's ability, status and occupation. I say harmless because it had zero impact on her career. If anything, it meant the administration felt bad and waited a year to fire her for gambling on school computers. And surprisingly it led to a follow-up rumor that she'd paid a guy to pose as her husband to hide the fact that she was really married to a blind shepherd. Blind shepherd husband is the real hero of this story. Sacrificed himself so others didn't have to. Had a computer science teacher say my program wasn't working because it used two different variable types. Like, you can't use char and int in the same program, ever. Basically every program ever made does this. I was the only Asian guy in my class. My PE teacher when meeting me for the first time insisted that he taught all four of my brothers. I have only one brother but he assumed that we were all related. My kindergarten teacher misspelled my name the entire year. I may have been 5 years old, but I knew how to spell my name. She insisted that my name was spelled a different way. I ended up calling her the wrong name too, so we both got each other's names wrong the entire year. With a name like Susix I would misspell it a lot as well. Cool guy football coach. Somehow he got stuck with English class instead of history one semester. 10th grade at the time. First day of school he writes vulture on the board. Yes, he meant vulture. A new teacher replaced him for that class subject a few weeks later. I have some questions about why he was attempting to write vulture on the board in the first place. College maths teacher insisted that there was no gravity on the moon. Everyone else in class nods along, but I can't keep my mouth shut. But teacher, how could the astronauts landed and walked around if there was no gravity? That's simple. They had really heavy boots. Everyone else nods along like this makes perfect sense. I said I think I'm in the wrong room, dropped that class and signed up for a different teacher. I was once sent out of class for disagreeing with my geography teacher. Secondary high school, 4th year. She was adamant that a kilometer was 1,000 miles. I was in sheer disbelief and got a bit heated in my pointing out of her error. She sends me out of the class while I'm having to penitently stand outside the room. The head of the geography department, one Mr. Latimer, walks past and asks me why I'm there. I tell him. He bursts out laughing and moves me up a few sets in geography into his class. I never had the other teacher again, but dang was my opinion of her utterly ruined. She was a student teacher talking about the creation of the US military. She called it the Marine Corps. No idea why that stuck with me as long as it did. Bless her heart. I used to love to draw my own cartoon characters as a little kid, until my art teacher at the time told me, yeah, Cartoons aren't real art though. I was like 10, and after that felt completely discouraged from drawing and rarely did it after. I ended up skipping her class a lot after that. Oh look, a child has a passion for the subject I'm supposed to be teaching. Let me just destroy it. The Chinese people throw a can in the air, and whatever sound it makes when it hits the ground, that's what they name their kids. That's why it's so many named Ting and Chang. I asked him if Bruce Lee's can said Bruce when it hit the ground, and that's how I failed 10th grade history. I'm just imagining a can hitting the ground and saying Bruce. I had a test during religion class. Keep in mind that we were pretty young at the time, around 10. It was about the beginning of time and the creation of Earth. One of the questions were how many days did it take for God to create the world? I responded 6 days, the reason being that on the 7 days he rested. I did not get correct on the question and went to ask what did wrong. I also explained my answer. She did not give in and kept saying that it was wrong. When I didn't give up, she took it really personal and started screaming at me. Man, I love religion classes. When I was in Sunday school, I wanted to bring cupcakes in on my birthday. Instead, she said I could write a 5-page essay about the sin whose feast day I was born on a 5-hour presentation on him. My mom got so mad. She did it for me and still made cupcakes. Teacher, you haven't seen the ocean if you've only been to the Gulf of Mexico. Me, but isn't the Gulf of Mexico part of the ocean? Teacher, well, you could say that creek out back of the school is part of the ocean. She's wrong and technically correct all at the same time. In school we had a French assignment where we had to put into categories what boys and girls like to do for fun. I wrote video games in both categories and the teacher marked it wrong, saying girls don't play video games. Okay. I don't recall what was said exactly, but my high school math teacher had us grading each other's tests. One of the questions she gave the answer to I knew was wrong. Raised my hand and explained myself. With an annoyed look, she proceeded to belittle me for questioning her math skills. Then other students raised their hands saying they came to the same answer as I did. Now fed up with us lowly students, the teacher stood up and proceeded to write the equation on the blackboard to show us just how wrong we were. When we pointed out what she was doing wrong, she stopped, turned, sat down and continued telling us the answers, never once admitting she screwed up. My 4th grade teacher told me that PM was in the morning and AM was at night. I told her she was wrong and got detention for it. Frick you, Ms. Schroeder. My Chinese teacher told my class that she expects her kids to get no grade no lower than 95%. Therefore she will not give us a grade lower than 95%. I am okay with this. I had severe social anxiety and nausea and my teacher told me it was the devil messing with me. I went to a religious school. I think the right response is to look her in the eye and say, "Get behind me, Satan." I was in 4th grade, a few decades ago, when I wrote a little current events assignment about some Englishmen whom I referred to as Britons. Teacher circled it and wrote in red, "No such word," and docked me for it. B never even cracked a dictionary and it was not permitted to challenge a teacher. As an Englishman, I am also a Briton. You were correct. All my teachers had were blatant lies and storytelling, but my favorite was Mr. D, history teacher, who told freshmen if they did well in their last 2 years they can skip classes to use a private bowling alley upstairs. This was convincing cause there was a quarry next door and they blasted daily, rumbling the building. In his room, it sounded like bowling balls rolling at their targets. See, that's just funny. I went to a Christian high school, so ignoring standard religious beliefs, wet hair turns into worms. I crap you not. Elaborate, please. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.